TrueNorthTV, powered by Communitech. From Waterloo Region, Ontario, Canada to the world. The conversations you need and want to hear from interesting people on topics at the intersection of technology and humanity. Tech for good. Let's get started.
Well, thanks, Talia, and welcome everyone to TrueNorthTV. Today I'm joined by Alex Benay.
Thank you for having me. I apologize if I go sweaty a little bit. It's like 33 degrees up here, but it's great. So first world problem.
Canadian summers, gotta love them. Anyway, Alex, of course, most recently CIO with the Government of Canada. You worked with us here in Waterloo when you were VP at OpenText. You're now involved with a worldwide consortium around the web. All kinds of things going on, lots of experience. And now as you step back from this sort of mix of public and private types of organizations with different governance models, with different stakeholders, with different ways of operating, tell us a bit about what you learned in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think if you take a step back and you look even globally, the countries that are winning this digital thing, if I could call it that, so, economy of the intangibles, digital service delivery, are the countries that change the fastest. Doesn't mean it's, always the right change in the sense of like they don't get it 100%, but it's whoever's capable of changing the fastest wins. It's like governments now have to face go-to-market realities that maybe they weren't used to in the past, because in the industrial age, it was people plus resources equals output. Now it's ideas, data, IP equal output. That means your laws and your regs and everything has to change faster. And frankly, the system wasn't designed for that. Like you're seeing some of the stress tests with COVID, and I think the public servants in Ottawa and all the provincial capitals and the municipalities are doing an amazing job reacting to COVID, but they're operating in a system that's not designed to operate that quickly. And it's still sort of, fighting a forest fire with a water gun in some ways. So that's probably my biggest takeaway is our national competitiveness and prosperity is in the hands of a system, not people, but a system that isn't designed for the industrial economy or the digital economy. It is completely designed for the industrial age. So that's a huge challenge to get things done quickly, the right way, be inclusive, all of the other things we have to be in a system that wasn't necessarily designed in your favor for today.
So what do we need to do to fix this? I mean, I say the word fix this like it's an easy thing and somebody throws a switch, but where do we start? Where do we need to get to?
I think if you look at, digital in the context of people, technology, service, and let's say legislation, regs, and policy, I think for the most part, our public institutions around the country have bought every piece of technology there is. Don't necessarily think it's a technology, although we could do better in adopting emerging edge technologies faster. I think our people side, though, we still recruit out of the major national and provincial capitals, and that kind of negates regions that may have really good university programs or graduates up north or other places. So I do think our people model has to change completely. Hopefully COVID gives us the excuse to do that, because our people model doesn't really work, to get the best from Canadians from every corner of the country. Sorry, there's bugs in here. The other part of this on the service front is we still see our public services as the exclusive domain of government, when really there's no reason our insurance company couldn't renew our driver's license for us. Right? The tech is there. What's not there, though, is the legislation, policies, and regulations. Those are the things that are a little bit more lagging, I would say, compared to the people, compared to some of the tech, compared to some of the service strategies. Is we need to be able to change regulations the fastest. I'll give you a quick example. I believe it's General Motors has some of its global AI headquarters in Markham, Ontario. You would have thought that the city of Toronto could have changed its regulations faster over the last decade to capitalize on this and bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of autonomous vehicle testing market. But it didn't really do that. The first city in North America to do that, I believe, was Phoenix. So Phoenix, Arizona. So you see where we used to do policies, ledge, and regs, and all of this complicated government stuff, it's not fast enough, right? So the other three you could fix more quickly. We have to crack the nut of how to do legislation quickly, how to do regulations quickly. Like, think of regs in the context of COVID. Like, how many of them are going to have to change, right? And you can't do that the old way. So why not use AI to do it? Like, why not do predictive modeling, right? But that's not necessarily part of the discussion right now in most of our governments. So in order to kind of, this is a bad term, in order to kind of leverage COVID for the opportunity that it presented us, not negating the tremendous sacrifice that's been done in loss of life, but it would be sad to revert back to the old model once the situation normalizes. And so hopefully public service around the country have an opportunity to kind of recreate how they govern. And that's the hard fix.
Yeah, I know it's interesting, and I think we're all working through right now what does post-COVID look like, and both the opportunities and the threats. How do we hang on to some of the things that we did really well during this pandemic, and how do we ensure at the same time that we don't get caught flat-footed again, unprepared again? The one that I think is most interesting in all of this is the sort of notion that that proximity has become optional. How do you think that is? I know, and I do talk to a lot of ministers and deputies, and there's a real sense that people, by and large, whether it's big government or whether it's big corporations, people come to the conclusion that they need to start thinking about place differently. They don't need to recruit everybody to come to Ottawa to work for the government of Canada. What do you see coming out of this? How fundamental do you think the shift in the notion of place is going to be?
I hope it's turned on its head. I'll give you an example because it feels like I talk about Estonia all the time, right? And like, people would think I get paid for it every time because I talk about them so much. But if you've had the pleasure of going to Tallinn as often as I have, they've really created a digital society. And they think digital first. So let me give you two examples of what's so different between them and us, and then sort of loop back to your question. But you can become a citizen of Estonia and never set foot in the country. That's the first thing. So when they came up with this program 4 or 5 years ago, people thought it was cute. Like, it was a gimmick, right? Like, what's the value add of being an Estonia or an Estonia resident as a e-citizen and never stepping foot in the country? Well, think about the immigration program simplicity of that. Like, it's an online application like you're shopping for insurance. But then it got really serious, and it's getting more serious, and I don't think we quite realize it. Back to the competitiveness for a country. If you were to Google Estonia, South Korea, e-citizen program, you'll get a blog from an Estonian government official who is talking about how they've signed an MOU with the government of South Korea that will encourage South Korean startups to become e-Estonian businesses. So you can now be an e-Estonia business and get instant access to the EU from it, with or without an EU free trade agreement. So think about it. So they're like, you don't need to step foot in the country. You can launch a business in Estonia. They'll create the right programs to be free, flexible, nimble, all of these things. And here we are still talking about an immigration model where you have to come to Canada or you have to come to Ottawa to work. And so we're still tied to industrial age thinking on how we design our recruitment or people. Meanwhile, countries like Estonia, they're just moving 100 miles an hour, very fast. And with concepts of physical space that we would come up with excuses as to the reason why we can't do these things.
Alex, you've talked about countries like Estonia and Portugal and this notion of digital identity. What is digital identity? Why is it important?
Yeah. The best way of looking at digital identity and platforms that do national data exchange between sectors and all of this digital infrastructure, it's like when we needed to connect the country in the industrial age, we created the railroad. We put it in place. We now have that same need in the digital economy, but we haven't put any railroads down. Like, actually, literally none. So digital identity is one of those key components in a digital economy because it permits the individual to create an architecture around the individual for their online behavior, their online lives. So with digital identity, you can securely have your government and your insurance company talk to one another. You can securely do transactions online. You can link your history. You can control your own privacy online. All of these things are driven through a strong, robust digital identity program. Now, in countries like Estonia and Portugal, it's a strong national digital identity. In countries like Canada, where we have, a strong federation, we could probably do a hybrid federated model. It's also quite possible. But there's no regulations around it. There's no standards yet, despite the fact that we're close to one through the CIO Strategy Council. And so people kind of either don't do it, or they ask for your passport or another form of identification online, and it's actually not secure. It doesn't permit digital service delivery. It doesn't unlock areas that may need speeding up. So how to get a mortgage approval in less than a second, right? Because all that backbone infrastructure is just not present. So Estonia's been at this for 20 plus years. Like, once you get them not promoting the country, which they're quite proud of, as they should be, they'll say, listen, we've been doing this for 20 something years. We started down this road. This morning, I was on a fellow call with some of my colleagues, on a call with some of my fellow colleagues from India, who are supporting the Indian government's digital identity rollout of like over 1 billion digital identities. Like, countries are starting to get digital, are starting to understand that this is a core piece of national infrastructure. It's a national good. And so that's an area where we've got a lot of catching up to do. It's one of the areas I didn't do so well as far as convincing or selling the story when I was in Ottawa that this was needed. So it probably, when I look back, will be one of the things I didn't get to do as much as I wish I would have been able to.
Could digital identity have helped us in response to the COVID crisis?
Oh, absolutely. Like, contact tracing with digital identity is much easier, right? If you think about also, if it's digital identity of businesses, think about the ease of moving goods potentially across jurisdictions in the country as well. Once you've got a unique identifier or multiple unique identifiers, if you're in a federated model, it absolutely would have helped on the organization. It would have helped on data flow. It helps on a one patient, one record kind of thing. In the healthcare space, like it would have definitely eased our transition. And you're seeing countries that have digital identity, like let's say Estonia, like move to virtual education easier, right? Move to telehealth easier. All of these services that we used to think had to be bricks and mortars, like, what are we going to open up a service counter for government in a province with a 150-person village? Probably not. But you could deliver all of those services seamlessly if you had digital identity and integrate it into whatever service channel you want, your insurance, Amazon, Alexa, you name it. So I think it would have given us a completely different hand to play during COVID had we had some of this infrastructure in place.
Now, I've heard you talk about the importance of these things as within the construct of the notion of jurisdictional competitiveness, and that if we think about sort of the competitiveness of countries, of nations, how important is this digital backbone to us if we really want to compete in the world?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think imagine a world in 5-6 years where countries like India have digital identity deployed throughout, and we're talking about doing free trade. Like, at some point there will be countries of haves and have-nots. We've been fortunate in the industrial age economy to be a resource-based country, so we've been in the have of sort of that side of the equation. I'm not sure we're in the have on the digital economy side of things. Whether it's IP growth, when you look at comparative sort of global charts and where we stand on that, or if it's commercialization of IP, which we all know has historically been a challenge for us, if it's infrastructure like identity or data exchange, you're seeing, not the flip side, so that sounds like a negative Nelly there. The flip side is that we are seeing way more investments in connectivity. We're seeing municipalities start talking about equality of access to internet, because we are one of the countries that's the highest sort of bill rates for our cell phone devices, and that doesn't work to move a country to digital. You're seeing massive investments in AI and other spaces. Now, massive by our standards, but if China decides to invest, which they have, we're still talking multiple dozens of billions. So this is a race. This is a race. And the last part of that, I'd say, and I don't think we've realized it, is like when you have articles like, I believe it's a New York Times article that has Russian ambassadors bragging about the fact that they're controlling the blockchain standard through ISO for the world. Like, we're actually it's a competition of values as well. So not only is it economic, it's values based. And this is an invisible, I don't want to call it a war, but it's an invisible competition that's going on underneath the nose of frankly too many Canadians without them understanding it, because it's a technical, it's in the hands of the few sort of technical leads that get this space. So it's, for me, like, listen, I'm a total tech policy geek, so I love it. So, but it's not well understood necessarily how this is going to impact either our rights, our social cohesion, our economy, and everything moving forward.
Well, it's a huge issue, and every time I hear you speak about it, of course, I feel a real sense of urgency that we've got to do something quickly. Do you think COVID's going to be the platform that's going to allow us to move quickly on this? Is this the burning platform that we need?
Well, I'm just going to answer what my gut was going to tell me to answer initially, is I'm not sure we're doing enough. I think that the structures that we talked about earlier on may be in the way. So a contact tracing app that is not national, provinces and people get to opt in, as a privileged Canadian that travels for his job, scares me a lot, actually, because there is no national contact tracing app. It's all going to be regional based. So that kind of stuff scares me. So I don't think we've cut through that as a result of COVID. I think so. Our structures that were that were very successful in a previous economy don't work in this economy, because data doesn't care about our federal provincial situations. It doesn't care about borders. Estonians, as we've talked about, have understood that. So I think there's a lot of room to maneuver, to grow here. If you look at the education space, I think citizens were understanding of the situation in late winter, early spring. I think if there's a second wave of this that hits in the fall, I don't think citizens and parents are as understanding of our educational systems across the country if there's not some form of virtual education available in a much more structured way. So for that, you need connectivity, you need hardware, you need identity, right? And so I think it's a push. I don't know if it pushes us over the edge, over the top of the hill. Sadly, I think.
Time to look at federalism again? Is it time to look at federal, provincial powers? The new model?
Yeah. I just hate I can't get beer across the provinces, kind of thing, or different kinds of spirits that I like from BC easily, or wines. So, I mean, I'd love for us to just fix that part. I think a lot of Canadians would like us to fix that simple part. I think if you polled most Canadians, I don't think we get the best out of our country by some of the constructs we've got in place. So how do you make that seamless? And listen, if not now, then when? And it's not I would say not as far as revisiting federalism, but we're just one tweet away from masks being repatriated back to the US or other things like that. Like, we are in some precarious times, and our national supply chain isn't really coordinated, for example, right? So how does a mask production company in Quebec know that there's a plastic producer in Alberta that's got surplus stock that could help the mask production in Quebec? Like that. So we're very much at the mercy of very many things here. And I just think that certain constructs that have been there forever just should not be applying in this current state.
Well, I love the comment, if not now, then when. And I know that there is a lot of conversations happening across the country to try to pull together a national supply chain. We've heard Prime Minister and Premiers talking about the need for resilient supply chains for key and critical products and services for us, so we don't get caught flat-footed again. You've been involved in these conversations. Tell me about the significance of this and what's going on.
Yeah, I would say two things. I would say I was asked once by very, very senior people in Ottawa, what could they do to help? And my number one answer was legislate faster and remove regulatory roadblocks where it makes sense. And the thing is like, that's the hardest thing to do in Ottawa or Toronto or Quebec City or Victoria. Now I feel like I have to name them all because I'm probably going to feel like I'm going to upset some people. But so that's the hardest thing to do. Well, then the second thing we could look at doing is other countries tend to buy and support, and not just through programs or grants, but actually purchasing of equipment, of ideas, of software, of IP differently than Canada does. DARPA in the US is an amazing story. Like, we got autonomous vehicle from there, we've got drones from there, we got all these other things, and it's all coming from similar kinds of programs that translate from idea to buy. So I think the more we keep, and this isn't just a buy Canadian thing, it's a bit more complicated than that, as you know. But that would be an easier start potentially than legislating or regulating. How do you build better resiliency in all of the things we do? By having our governments, both federally, provincially, frankly, municipally too, if you're Toronto or Montreal or others, but like, be the first buyer, right? And change your program so that you are the first buyer. At OpenText, it was extremely hard to sell into Canada. If you look at other markets, and the irony of it is we had great programs in Canada to sell abroad, right? So we would use those as a Canadian entity all the time, Foreign Affairs, Canadian Commercial Corporation, EDC, but the same constructs don't exist as easily in the country. And so I think that would be an area where, if you can't legislate and regulate faster for whatever reason, then at least focus on being the first buyer. Because I think we've experienced in this COVID situation, just a few instances where maybe we were at a few moments of unease there as a result of discussions around nationalization of supply chains, not just in Canada or the US, but I was in France while it was shutting down, and Macron was talking about it, of all people, right? So I think it's time we look at the first buyer program like really seriously here.
Are we going to be able to fix our supply chain so that we're ready for the next time this happens?
We have all the tools at our disposal, right? The question is I think, are we going to be actually able to that roadblock discussion around legislation and regulation? That's not changing fast enough. So I think we've got desire, will, the right fire. So if I get, COVID has lit the right fire, but it gets back to the governance question, which is like the most boring answer on the planet, I understand. But if those things don't change faster, it's going to be really tough. It's going to be increasingly tough. Right, and you saw it again with the contact tracing app. Like, it should, as a Canadian, I personally would like a national app, not a federal app. A national contact tracing app would make me feel a little bit better.
So now that you work for a global consulting firm, which we like to refer to as semi-retirement, now that you're semi-retired and you look back over this set of experiences that you've had, you've run museums, you worked for OpenText, global corporations, you've been the CIO for the Government of Canada. What are you thinking about right now? What's on your mind?
I am struggling to find a way to continuously educate and keep the interest on some of the things we talked about: national competitiveness, human rights in a digital age, the right regulations that help us. I'm afraid that my children grow up in a Canada that hasn't kind of shifted. And I'll give you an example. In Malta, I believe they changed all their national regulations in a matter of a few months to permit cryptocurrency investment, and it resulted in, I believe the article, don't quote me, but like billions of dollars of foreign investment in Malta for cryptocurrency, because they realized that their regulations was a powerful social economic tool. I'm not sure we're there yet. And that part is what I'm consumed with. And I don't know if it's easier to change that in the system or out of the system. I'm going to find out based on where I'm sitting. But that is an area that I'm very consumed with. And it's something that's not easy to tackle, because if it was, it would have been done by now.
Well, thank you again for joining us here today from arguably some of the most beautiful topography in the world, Canadian summers and the Canadian Shield.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching this episode of True North TV. To catch the next episode, subscribe to Communitech's YouTube channel today.